Hi, and welcome to the Best Books Podcast, an Orchard Hill Church podcast that helps you choose your next book. My guest today is someone I'm really excited to have on. It is Orchard Hill's best version of a personality hire. Meet Devin Kelly. Devin, how's it going?
It's going so well.
I say you're a personality hire not because you're bad at your job, but just because you bring the energy and the personality that we need.
I would so agree with that. I'm well-rounded, humble, good at my job, great personality.
I didn't say you're good at your job. I just said you're not
bad.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
I'll take it. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, cool. Well, today Devin and I are going to talk about a book that's on her heart. We're going to talk about The Case for Grace by Lee Strobel. If you've heard of The Case for Christ, Case for the Resurrection. No, that's not it.
He has a lot of cases.
A lot of cases
to work through.
Yeah, cases in a good way. But before we get into that, so one of the themes of the book is that the gospel actually has a change, right? That we are changed over time through this thing that we call grace. So I wanted to ask you a little bit of fun as we get started. If you just could snap your fingers and wake up tomorrow and change anything about your life, whether it be being able to run a marathon in 5 minutes, being able to be more patient, go any direction you want with it. If there was anything that you could change about Devin Kelly, what would it be?
Wow, that is such a deep and really good question.
It wasn't supposed to be, but now that it's left my mouth, I am kind of like, wow, that is less of a game and more of a thought-provoking.
If I could change anything about my life, I would say I want to be able to do a handstand and a backflip without having to put any work into it. Like, I don't want to train or get good at it or put the time in. Like, I just want to be able to do it.
Have you ever seen those videos of people who learn how to do a backflip in like a 1 hour session? I think that's so cool. Like they
I haven't seen an hour.
Like they have like the pads and they're just like, okay, now you can start, that kind of thing.
I have seen
just
that.
Like the gymnastics.
Yeah. But they've already had the gymnastics background. Like, I don't want that. I just want to be able to wake up one day.
No,
and
what I'm saying is these people don't have the gymnastics background, but the teacher is just so good. So anyway, I'll
That's
send you
wild.
those clips and then you can work on it.
I'll
It's not
make
instant.
the case for it. Yeah.
For it. It's not as instant as you want it, but it's the next closest thing.
All right.
I think for me, I actually haven't thought about this, but just off the cuff, along those lines, I really value flexibility because I'm not very flexible. I just think it would be so cool. I think most guys, the way they're wired, they want to be able to lift like 250 pounds over their head.
Yeah.
That would be nice too, to be honest.
That would be good.
I'm not going to be picky if that was on the table. But I do think it's really cool when someone can like put their palms flat on the ground.
That is
without
really
bending
cool.
their knees.
I can't do that either. Apparently, being tall actually prevents you from being flexible. Apparently, that's what I hear.
Glad I'm not tall.
In case you couldn't tell, he is kind of tall.
Yeah, for our YouTube viewers. And I think our audio-only viewers, I think I come across as tall, don't you think?
Yeah, you have a tall voice, for sure. Yeah,
Sounds good. Well, cool. Well, why don't you just remind us, Devin, your role at Orchard Hill, just what you do on a week-to-week basis, and then maybe just something that you're excited about. Could be at the church, could be outside church. Just feel free to go any direction.
Yeah, that's great. So I work in student ministry at Orchard Hill, primarily with the middle school, which is really epic and awesome. That's my favorite group of people to be with. Just throughout the week, we have small groups. We have middle school merge on Sunday mornings during the 9 and 10:45 services. So it's a really fun time. And something that's coming up that I'm really looking forward to is the middle school costume party in October. So fun. It was really fun last year, so we're running it back, and it's going to be great.
Yeah, tell me more about Merge. Like, what is that like? Putting it on. What if I was a middle schooler? I guess what could I expect coming to it?
Yeah, so you can show up around 9 or around 10:45 whenever it starts.
Right.
Sunday mornings, yep. You come up to the loft and lounge area of Student Min, the next gen wing upstairs. come up there. We hang out in the lounge for a little bit. There's coloring sheets, there's video games. I'm talking 3 TVs on the wall with Switch and Xbox. It's pretty wild. There's a bubble hockey machine, ping pong table, stuff like that. So many tools and resources to be able to connect with other kids, connect with leaders. It's awesome. Then we move into the loft, and there's a game that takes place, and then also some worship, also led by students. So it's a really fun time. And then you get to hear a 10 to 12 minute message, like a devotional, basically, from a staff member or a small group leader. So it's really cool, really gospel-centered, and yeah, just a great way to meet other middle schoolers and have that time where you hear the gospel and hopefully open your heart to that. So yeah.
Sure. Kind of a deeper question, but you as a staff member overseeing something like Merge, what would you consider a successful Sunday morning at Merge? Like, what are sort of the key elements? Is it more about connecting with kids? Is it about the message that they're hearing? Like all the above, I'm just curious.
Yeah, that is a good question.
I ask because sometimes I think, what I'll say before you answer, I think sometimes as staff members we can get into it is just sort of a weekly cycle. And so sometimes I think we can fall back into like, well, it happened, therefore it's a success, you know what I mean? But I'd be curious from your standpoint, is there anything that stands out as like, when I see middle schoolers here on a Sunday morning, when we have them here for this hour of time, what are you looking to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think as a staff member, my thing admittedly is, like you were talking about, if the game, for the most part, goes well and there's no huge hiccups with worship and the talk is gospel-centered and, for the most part, delivered well, then I'm usually of the viewpoint of, like, that's a win. That's awesome. But what's interesting is I used to also volunteer in Student Min before I was on staff, and what was a win to me was being able to meet new students and say hi and have those connection points. So I do think that sometimes if I am not mindful of that, I do lose sight of that, and my real passion and desire for doing student ministry, which is just making those connections and being relational in that way. So
yeah, I think it's really neat that you started out as a volunteer and now you're working here, because I think when you're a volunteer you do have that, it's almost the most pure concentrated version of like, I'm here for the right reasons, whereas sometimes ironically when you're a staff member you're in so many of the weeds. And so I think that's cool that you can always kind of think back to it of like, hey, let's remember why we're here. Let's remember what this is all about. Let's remember that it's about the gospel. It's about grace, as we're about to talk about today. So like I said, today Devin and I will be discussing the book, The Case for Grace by Lee Strobel. Devin, just give us a sense of why did you choose this book? What impact has it had on you?
Yeah, so basically one of my interests when studying Christianity is apologetics. And like you said earlier, Lee Strobel has a book titled The Case for Christ, and that is very apologetics heavy. And for anyone who doesn't know what apologetics is, just making the case for the Christian faith in this context. Yeah, I just saw that as a really valuable book with lots of good information and making a really strong case for Jesus and why he is the Son of God and why he's worth following as God. So I heard about The Case for Grace, and I admittedly wanted to read it because I thought it was going to have a little bit of apologetics in it, but actually it doesn't have a lot of apologetics at all. What it is mainly is a bunch of stories from different people, to be able to show really practically through the lives of people God's grace and how he gives that out and what that means So really, Lee Strobel, he's not an apologist really, he's a reporter. So this is kind of going into the reporter side, and he's doing interviews and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really good read. I like it.
Yeah, along those lines, why do you think he decided to write this book? I think he easily could have just kept the apologetics angle that he'd built up. As you said, this is kind of like going in a different, similar direction, but definitely different. So why do you think he decided to write this? Did that come through in the book?
Yeah, towards the beginning of the book, I don't know if it was, like the epilogue or if it was the first chapter, but somewhere in the beginning, he actually explains that he had his own battle and his own struggle with understanding God's grace. So part of that was, instead of just struggling with it and, okay, I'm going to come to terms with it myself, he is very passionate about and of the mindset of, like, hey, let's see what other people are saying about it and what they have, what knowledge they have and what wisdom they can offer. So he explains his story with his dad and how he had a really troubled relationship with him. And so that affected his view of God. So through that and because of that, he wanted to interview a bunch of people that also struggled with grace and came out on the other side through ups and downs. So yeah, it's stories about the lives of real people, and it's messy, and it's it has forward points and backward points. So I think that's why it's really good, because it's relatable in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. Take us through just the structure. You mentioned that it's about him interviewing other people. Is that sort of the structure of, hey, chapter 1, person A, chapter 2, person B, or is it more like the theme? There's a theme for each person, and he sort of builds on that as a writer. Like, is it purely interviews, or is there like some editorializing from him of like, here's the interview and here's the biblical truth that I'm taking from it?
It's kind of a mixture of both of those things, actually. So each chapter is a story. And then, for the chapter, it's not just titled Story 1, Story 2. It's titled The Orphan, or The Addict, or The College Professor, or whatever it is. So that gives you the theme of the person or what he's going to be talking about. And and then just each chapter is really devoted to that story. So,
yeah. Was there any story that particularly stuck out to you? Like, was there one that when you think of this book, you think, oh, wow, this is the one that most spoke to me?
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading, I think it's chapter 2, it's The Orphan. And I really particularly liked that one because scripture does talk about how, whenever we are stuck in our sin, it's like we are orphans in a way, or we're, disconnected from God, right? Because we're living in sin and we don't want anything to do with God. And then in this story, very practically, there's this orphan that she had a really, really rough life, and she's like saying how she's undeserving of love and undeserving of a family and safety. And it's just like really sad to hear about and to read about. But then at the end of it, not to spoil it, but, she does get adopted by a family, and she receives love from the father, her stepfather, and it's just a beautiful moment and a beautiful, I think, reflection of God's grace and God's love, how even at our worst, even at our dirtiest, even when we feel like we're unworthy, God still will seek us out and care for us. And not only that, but give us love that we don't deserve, which is the thinking behind grace. So, that chapter really, really stuck out to me.
Yeah. There's a verse in Psalm 27 that makes me think of, is, though my father, my mother have forsaken me, the Lord will take me in. And I always love that imagery because of how it's picked up in the New Testament, talking about and you're no longer slaves, but you're sons and daughters of God because of what Jesus has done. And so, yeah, and that kind of leads us to, one of the themes of this book, which is just the idea, like we said at the beginning, that grace over time actually does change us. If we have gotten to a point where we are in the Word, we're doing all these things, and yet we don't see any fruit from that, it should cause us to question some things. So how have you seen that in your personal life, just as far as specifically grace leading to that kind of change? How do you think it should impact the way that we treat people? Feel free to go any direction.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I picked up this book and why I really love this book and just, why it affected me so much, I think, was because I read it at a time where I was fairly new to ministry. It was, about a year in, so not really new at all, but so a year ago. But it was a time in my life where I felt like I was pretty well into it, but at the same time kind of new and still trying to figure out the dynamic of what should I consider work in ministry and what should I consider part of my own personal faith journey, as far as working in the church, and how do I connect those things or disconnect them. And I actually, this is a phrase that I hear you say a lot, and it's, you don't have to be God's employee. You can be God's child, and you should be God's child. And I think I was going through a time where I was feeling like God's employee. I was feeling just slightly like a cog in the machine, or just maybe just like if I don't show up on a Sunday, or if I can't show up for whatever reason, how is ministry going to get done? And that's very unhealthy. That is not a good way to view ministry or just life in your walk with Christ in general, if you're going to serve at the church or anything like that. So when I read this book, it's really freeing in the sense of, grace is that free gift that you get of not only God's love and God's forgiveness, but also you get the burden taken off for performance. I don't have to do these things in order for God to love me or in order for his mission to be fulfilled. He invites me to be a part of it. And that is a really important invitation. I should take that seriously and take that with, with honor.
Yeah.
But I don't have to put that weight on myself, that pressure to perform. So that was what really helped me with this book and just with the idea of grace in general, that reminder that I needed at that time. So.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. I that is such a relatable idea, not just for us in ministry, but for anyone listening to this who, I think part of being a Christian is that we have to understand how do our works come through? Like, how does God see our works? To what degree is he pleased, even though we're not saved? All that question. And something, just a metaphor I think God gave me about a year ago was, if you imagine I don't know why it has to be a tennis ball, but imagine a tennis ball in one hand and maybe just like this slimy, sticky substance in the other. And I think so often the way our identity works with what we do for God is those things just slowly over time, if we don't unstick them, they just get stuck together to where we're like a yo-yo, and where, when we're doing good things for God, when we're waking up at a good time, doing our morning devotions, when we're sharing the gospel, we're up, and our self-esteem rises with our performance. But the opposite's just as true, right? When we're not doing well in those things, when life gets busy, we start to, the enemy uses that same logic to say, well, I don't know if you're even really God's child. And he uses those deceptions. And the imagery God gave me was like that he wants to unstick those things. But I think here's another mistake we make is almost this idea, we go too far and we say, well, God doesn't really care what I do. It's irrelevant to him. I'm his child after all. But I think where I've come with it is to imagine me in in God's left hand and my work in his right, and him almost presenting both these things to me and saying, I love both of these things. I love you even if you never did anything for me. And yet he also is pleased by obedience. He's pleased by my repentance, and he wants me to walk in that. And I'm kind of going on a long time here, but I'm getting to a point of, I really feel like over the past year that's made a really big difference in my ministry, where I'm not as paranoid about things going wrong. Because I was sharing this with some of our volunteer leaders. I had a whiteboard in front of me, and the metaphor I gave them was like, when we are wrapped up in our identity, it's like we're standing in front of the whiteboard, and any criticism of the things we do for God is ultimately a criticism of me. And so we take that super personally. Whereas when I'm unable to unstick those things and remind myself, I am loved by God before I was obedient, before I did any of this, we're able to, as a team, as a volunteer team, I'm able to sit with them and us to point at the whiteboard together and say, this is how the ministry could get better. And I'm able to actually receive that and say, yeah, there's probably an aspect of Merge that could be better. There's probably, we don't need to wrap our identity in those things. And so, I don't know, sorry, you sharing just got me thinking. And I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing that.
Yeah.
That just this idea of, hey, if your self-esteem seems to rise and fall with your obedience, maybe there's something to look into.
Yeah, well, I think to your point that you made earlier too, it doesn't matter if you're doing ministry in the church or not. As a volunteer, as staff, or anything, if you are someone that one day you feel like, I am really close to God because I'm so on fire for Him and I'm doing all the right things, I'm avoiding the wrong things, but then the next day you find yourself, maybe you feel distant from God, you feel like, oh, I'm not reading my Bible as much as I should, and whatever it might be. I think that is evidence of a identity issue, like what you were saying. So I think really grace, the idea of grace, is just reframing your identity and keeping in mind that whatever you do, it's an offering to God, and it's not who you are. That doesn't determine if God loves you. God already loves you. Anything that you do after that is something that is an offering to Him, and basically you're doing it because you love Him, not so that He can love you. So yeah.
Absolutely. So I think there's so many million-dollar questions when it comes to grace, questions that inevitably come up in our minds. It's something that I think through. Sometimes the way we define grace, it can almost just seem like nothing really matters, right? So my question to you would be, what's the difference between just simply excusing wrongdoing and extending true grace? Like, how are those things different, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that there are so many passages in Scripture, where the Bible talks about how it is, you should do things that are good and pleasing to the Lord. And, I think we think about the Old Testament and we view that as, oh, that's just rules, that's burdens that God is putting on us, and that's the law. And then the New Testament, that's Jesus, and that's light and airy and fun, and Jesus is the fun guy, and God the Father is the rule giver. And I think the way to think about it and view it properly is that God gives us these laws and these rules in order to protect ourselves, protect others, because it's good for His creation. Ultimately, it's good for us, it's good for others. And then Jesus makes it so that it's not a burden, so that you don't have to view it as, oh, I have to do these things because if I don't, that means I'm not a Christian, or that means I'm not, a good person, or whatever you might think. But Jesus then ultimately fulfills all of these laws so that you don't have to, but then also you get to be a part of helping others know Jesus, being in alignment with God, so that you can understand Him more, you can further your relationship with Him and deepen your relationship with Him, and also help other people through example and through words know who Jesus is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why Paul talks so much in Romans about the law's relationship with righteousness, because he's holding that tension of grace being important, but he's not simply saying, well, the law no longer matters. It's all about whose righteousness are we trusting, if that makes sense. Am I trusting in a Devin righteousness, or am I trusting in a Christ righteousness? And how righteousness and grace work together, I think, is because the root word for grace is it's a gift, right? And so when I think of grace, I ultimately think of gifted righteousness. When I'm doing really well and that affects my self-esteem, that's a telltale sign that I'm trusting in Jonathan's righteousness. I'm saying I am made right before God because Jonathan's a good boy. He's type A. He's an achiever, right? He's doing good. He's passing all the tests. He's making the team, right? But that's not how the gospel works. Where the gospel is Jesus has given us his righteousness. Jesus has made the team. Jesus has made the grade. Jesus has fulfilled the law. And the beautiful thing about that is it's a way of God showing us his gracious heart and yet upholding the law at the same time and saying, this is really important. And it was so important that Jesus needed to fulfill it and then to die in our place. So I think all this stuff is so good. I think sometimes when we think of grace, we do kind of think of God waking up one day and just thinking, you know what, this law stuff doesn't really matter.
Right.
And yet Jesus' death is the reminder that it does matter. It mattered so much that Jesus had to die. And so that is Satan's tactic, I think, is to convince us, well, it doesn't really matter. Whether you sin or not, the effect is the same. And really, we as Christians know the effect isn't the same because we feel further from God. We know that, it's what Paul says in Romans chapter 6, should we go on sinning now that grace abounds? Well, absolutely not, because how are we going to keep doing the things that Jesus died for? It's more of a logical argument. It just doesn't make any sense. So, sorry, that was another
right.
train of
keep
thought.
it up. That's good.
Yeah. So I guess my last question regarding the book would be, is there any theme that came across in the book? I know we talked about the story of the orphan, but was there any overall theme that you thought, this is something that I'm taking away. This is a theme that I'd love to be able to just share with someone?
Yeah, I think across all of the stories, you see this overall, it's almost like what is that called? Like a line chart or whatever
Graph.
It is. A graph,
Yeah,
some sort of
graph,
graph, line
yeah.
graph. Where
really
it's
showing that we're in ministry and
not a mathematician.
God can use anyone, and
God can use anyone.
Two
even
personality hires, yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Anyways, a graph or whatever. I'm gonna ditch that. But basically, there's a flow of, there's this person. Either they start out at the bottom, or they start up high and then they get to the bottom somehow. And you are reading it, and at least I had this effect, and I think other people will too if they read it. The feeling of, man, I really feel what that feel. Even if I've never experienced this specific thing, I understand the feeling of not feeling worthy or not feeling super great about myself, or maybe even at my lowest point. And then what ends up happening is through that, they become honest about their situation, whether that's they're an orphan and something happened to them, or maybe they are having an affair and that's something that they're doing to others, so they confess that sin or something like that. So you get them from this point of, okay, extremely, extremely low, and I got myself here, or the world got myself here, because the world is broken. And then God takes them to life transformation, or just mindset or identity shift. And it's just kind of, that formula is throughout the chapters of the book. And I think it is just really beautiful and really encouraging. to be able to look at that. If you're someone who maybe you don't feel super down or low or far from God, or maybe you do, maybe you are someone that right now you're feeling far from God, or like what you're doing is not working or not enough, and you're able to see, okay, but there was light at the end of the tunnel for this person, and that light is something outside of myself that I can look to, that this person looked to, and I can look to as well. So yeah, it's really good for that.
Yeah, and that's just the power of stories, right? It's just so helpful when we're going through something to be able to identify with someone's story. I've never been an orphan, but I do know how rejection feels. I know how just a really dark day feels. And so you can use that as a source of hope, and just to say, maybe the situation is different, but man, just how great the gospel is, and just giving us new eyes for everything, to where even kind of Paul's logic at the end of Romans 8, it's just like, what then should we say? If God is for us, who can be against us? My circumstance might not have changed a bit. I might be dealing with something that is a life sentence in some ways. And yet when we have this message of grace consistently in our minds, of being reminded, wow, because of what Jesus did, God is no longer against me. God is on my side. I'm no longer an enemy. God is now my Savior. I think it just makes the biggest difference. My last question for you would be, you came into this, you said at the beginning, you wanted it to be about apologetics. It didn't end up being about apologetics.
Yeah.
Would you say that was an overall positive, or were you like, I kind of wish you would have written about apologetics?
That's a good question. At first, I feel like I was a little bummed. I felt clickbaited for a second by the author name, but overall, I loved the book enough to talk about it for half an hour or however long we've been talking. Yeah, it really stuck with me. I really appreciate, I think, too, that was exactly what I needed at that time in my life. So if it would have been apologetics, I think that necessarily wouldn't have been what I needed, or what this book really deserved.
You were glad he tricked you.
I was glad to be clickbaited, yeah.
And so for someone listening to this conversation, I think we would extend the same invitation. Hey, maybe if you've heard of Lee Strobel, if you've read some of his other stuff, don't discount this just because it's not specifically about apologetics. I think this topic is so universal that it really could be extended to anyone who calls themselves a Christian, or anyone who's still searching, and maybe the question they're asking is, okay, how do I know that this Jesus stuff actually works? How do I know that this Jesus stuff will actually transform my life? Well, here you go. Here's 11 stories. I can't remember how many you said, but here's a dozen stories that sort of bear that out. So, Devin, can't thank you enough for coming on and talking about this. We've been talking once again to Devin Kelly about the book "The Case for Grace" by Lee Strobel. Devin, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. We really hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you liked this episode, be sure to share it with someone that you think would enjoy it. That's going to help get this podcast and other resources like Orchard Hill Plus into the hands of more people, and thus in turn going to help us accomplish our goal of helping people find and follow Jesus Christ. Please join us next time as we continue to highlight books that will help you in your spiritual journey. Until next time, I'm Jonathan Thiede, and this has been Best Books.